Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Denny Bloom. I'm a senior consultant at SlimStock Canada, and one of my roles in this position is to help companies improve their demand and supply planning processes in order to optimize their inventory. SlimStock is a software company. We provide inventory management software and solutions, and we have local support. We are a global company. We have offices in about 26 countries and run over 130 projects a year, specializing in demand and supply planning. Some of our specialties would include forecasting, inventory management, assortment, promotions management. We do shelf life management, sales and operations planning, product lifecycle management over multiple locations, and of course order optimization. Today here we're with John Tichy from Vertical Supply Group, who's one of those customers that's been at the forefront of the COVID crisis, who's been doing a lot to adjust demand plans, to adjust the supply planning, and we invited him to talk about the steps that he took to mitigate the risks and make sure that his company came through this crisis correctly. So John, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Danny. As Danny said, I'm John Tichy. I'm the Director of Supply Chain here at Vertical Supply Group in Greensboro, North Carolina. I've been with VSG now for a little over a year. Came on board in February of last year and actually oversaw the implementation of SlimStock here at VSG and have helped to develop that software into what it is today. I've been in supply chain planning, purchasing, demand planning for over 10 years. Native of North Carolina, and happy to be here today, and appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts and hopefully help somebody navigate through some of the rough waters that we've had to over the last several months.
Thanks, John. Very, very much appreciated, of course. So first, stage one, so the pre-COVID-19 era. So North America was hit, or before North America was hit with a big jump in cases. We saw the virus wreak havoc among many manufacturing cities in China and many countries in Europe that were strongly affected. So John, can you take us through the steps you took before the COVID virus started to manifest itself strongly in North America, and how did you deal with the vendors that were on the brink of being affected?
Well, the first thing we tried to do, obviously it started in Asia, primarily China, but it impacted other countries as well, as we tried to establish connection with each of those vendors just to find out what their current status was. This virus came at the tail end of the Chinese New Year holiday, and we had a lot of vendors whose workforces were not anywhere near 100%, and certainly weren't even in the immediate area because of the number of people that had traveled to visit family and those sorts of things. So we were making the assumption that all of our factories in China, as well as factories in Taiwan, were affected almost 100%. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that. We're trying to conserve energy, so if I don't move around in here a little bit, my lights shut off. So anyhow, we made the assumption that all of them were affected, more or less 100%, until we were able to make contact with them and get some updates. By that time, it was too late to try and make any sort of buying decisions and get ahead of it. So really at that point, what we were looking at was what's on the water, and is there anything in port in Asia that we could try and expedite with our freight handlers to get on a boat and get sailing before possibly ports were closed down. So that was the first thing we did, was really look at what inventory was in limbo and what we needed to try and get on a boat and get coming to the U.S. as quickly as possible.
When you look at that exercise, I think that's a very smart thing to do to really look at what is actually required, and what did you have already produced that you could expedite. Did you do that for every product that was on the boat there, or did you kind of try to highlight the ones where you might think that there would be supply issues?
We certainly looked at the ones where we thought there would be supply issues, but really we took a relatively heavy-handed approach to that, and reason being, the product coming out of Asia is for a brand that we own. We're the manufacturer, for lack of a better term, and obviously the impact of being out of stock on an item that someone else makes is significant, and it hurts your sales. But when you're out of stock on items that you're the sole source of supply for, it's really a black eye. And so, we erred on the side of caution and tried to make sure that we pulled forward as much as we could while maintaining some control over our working capital management and not, throwing finance into a tailspin.
So those were the Asian suppliers. I understood you also have a significant chunk of suppliers based out of Italy, which was hit a couple of weeks later. What did you manage to do for those?
So for Italy, we saw things getting worse in Italy, after the initial onset of cases there. And so the first thing we did was we looked at a pull forward strategy of, okay, if this thing is going to last what everybody's saying it is, what would approximate number of days of inventory look like to buy ahead? We put together a buy plan, and we went to our finance department by vendor and said, listen, we have these X number of vendors. 1, 2, and 3 are our most critical. We absolutely feel like we need to invest this money. 4, 5, and 6 are important, but slightly less critical. If you're telling me that there's constraints, this is where I'm going to squeeze. And then the bottom handful, we said, look, these are targets of opportunity. If we can do it, great. If not, we can move on without it because we have substitute items that we can augment in the current time frame. So we went to finance on that. We had the buy plan put together. We told them what the dollar value was. We got approval for a portion of it, which is fully what we expected. And so we made some significant investments there, not only in vendors that were based in Italy and we were buying direct from Italy, but those that have a U.S. contingent, and the U.S. contingent more or less acts as an importer. There's one in particular that's a PPE supplier that's a big vendor of ours, and we put a lot of dollars into that to go ahead and get ahead of that, trying to ensure that we had in-stock rates throughout the next 90 to 120 days. It's been successful. We've seen back orders in that line remain relatively low, and so that's helped us out a lot. Then the assumption there was that if Italy is in this kind of situation, as connected as Europe is, and as tight-knit of an environment as it is, it was just a matter of time before we saw the virus start to spread throughout the rest of Western Europe. So we made similar pushes for product coming out of Germany, France, the UK, and really what we did is we looked at it by geographic region, and we started at Italy and worked our way out as we prioritized what lines needed to get bought and what inventory needed to get pulled forward. And nothing highly scientific about that other than that, I have a limited number of people on the team, and there's only so many hours in the day. And so we had to prioritize what was going to get handled first. As an old colleague of mine put it, you take care of the alligator closest to the boat first.
Very, very smart. Anyway, thanks for highlighting that. So what I want to talk the attendees of the webinar through is how do you really identify your priorities when it comes to investing that working capital in a situation like that? Of course, you need to look at it by region. You don't want to throw money at everyone and simply buy more. But even by vendor or by product, it's smart to build grids, to build classifications, to identify those top line items that are worth your money. So one thing that we typically see in practice and that works really well is to build a kind of a double ABC classification, which will translate into a 9-cell grid. So what you do is you build an ABC classification or do a Pareto analysis on your product, and you can do that on 2 criteria. Of course, these criteria need to match what's important for you. Very typically would be to use either a sales dollar or some form of margin dollars. And identify your A movers according to that class. So you get, as you'll see on the left side here, is an ABC grid that are your A movers when it comes to sales. So the items that do the top 80% of your total sales, or top 75 or top 70%. Now, sales dollars is of course not everything. You could have A movers or A items that bring in a lot of money but sell very slowly. Those are very risky items because the turns are low. They can require significant investment, but the risk in them is typically very high. And in order to do that, you need a second a second criteria. Typically, you're looking at order lines. So how many order lines are outbound? How often are my customers buying this product? And you can express it in units sold or order lines. And what you do, you kind of combine those two grids and overlay them with each other. So this will identify your AA items, which are the items that contribute a lot of order lines and a lot of sales. Obviously, that's your bread and butter. Or you identify your AC and CA mover. Now, if we look at supply chain strategy, and I find my AA items, this is what you need to monitor closely. Aim for high service, and you really need to pull forward. When we're looking at C movers in revenue and A in order lines, these are cheap items because they're a C in revenue, but they're an A in when it comes down to how often you sell it. And those are important service items. These are also ones that you need to stock up on. They're incredibly important to your for your service. If you're looking at a typical distributor, these are the nuts and bolts, the small items that if you don't have them, quite frankly, you would look like a fool. And that's why we follow a set and forget strategy. You buy a lot, and in times of crisis, you can still pull forward these items and ensure you always have them. Then you have your CA items, and that's where you might want to start cutting. These are the high revenue but low turn. This is where you need more planner focus. So this is where you could build mitigation strategies. Think about insourcing it into your own manufacturing instead of getting it from offshore. Because the number of turns is so low, a small dip in demand could cost you a lot of money. So this is kind of how you could make sure you prioritize the items and make sure you invest in the right ones. Now, when it comes down to pulling forward purchases, looking at supply chain planning. So you have an original plan, and let's say that maybe let's take Italy as an example. Week 11, 12, 13, and 14, you will not be able to have any outgoing shipments because they're going in quarantine. That means that in week 10, you actually need to place an order. Now, the tricky part is the delivery will be 6 weeks later, so you have time for it to go on the boat. So in this case, that means actually in week 19 or in week 10, you already need to order. And then that's where taking early action really helps, because if you would have placed that order of 119, which would reflect everything of the closure period plus what you would have ordered in week 10 already, this will ensure that you get your product in before their quarantine starts. But it also means that you are going to be holed up with a lot more inventory. So in week 16, you might actually get that whole chunk of order. And maybe an interesting question to John. That surge in inventory, it doesn't only have an effect on working capital. You took some special measures to make sure that the working capital was there, but it also has an effect on your operations. How's that something? How do you deal with that?
Well, on the operational piece, the first and foremost, we tried to make as much information known as possible, and just tried to give our operations team as much heads up and as much capability to understand what's coming in and why. And it's difficult because obviously if you're pulling forward more than a handful of weeks, you start running into spatial issues because most businesses aren't built to have a warehouse that's capable of handling a 60-day surge in demand. And so we've been able to mitigate that by trying to layer in inventory, trying to use multiple staggered ship dates where we could. Unfortunately, it wasn't always possible. We're also fortunate in that we have 3 warehouses, and so we can rely on each of the 3 warehouses to handle a little bit of that load as well. We did selectively use some third-party suppliers to temporarily store some inventory. Not a lot, but we did use that. We were a little hesitant at first because our fear was if things as we kind of got towards the end of phase 1 and we started seeing things in the U.S. getting concerned, could our inventory potentially be locked up in a warehouse somewhere because their staff couldn't move it, and so that became a concern, and really we kind of diverged from that strategy at that point. But really, we handled it on more or less a case-by-case basis with each of the vendors and each of the item types, because we have some things that are as small as the end of your finger and some other things that are the size of a refrigerator.